This course consists of lecture and practical application. There's a lot of lecture because there's a lot that goes on with these aircraft that you need to know that's not immediately obvious. The practical applications can be interspersed throughout. We'll have breaks whenever you guys need them, and allow me to set up the prac app stuff. This is, if you're familiar with the crawl, walk, run ideology of training, this is basically crawl and walk. It's a slight amount of run, but not much. That's not the focus of this. The focus of this is to give you the fundamentals that you'll use later on for actual engagements. These skill sets will be introduced to you. They will not be perfected here. To do this properly, you'll need to play with, play MCC, play SOAR, etc. Start with, let's go over to one of these Cobras and take a look at what it is. The purpose of the Cobra is an infantry support vehicle. It prioritizes the threats the infantry is less equipped to handle. In this case, that's armor, or anything with a big gun. It can do a lot of damage really fast. Due to the optic package, this can also do recon and overwatch. It's very responsive for that. Since it's a helo, it's a very responsive CAS aircraft. It can work very closely with ground units. Now, as you'll see here up front, we have a 20mm cannon. On the wings, we have FFARs and tow missiles. You'll also note that this aircraft has two main rotors, or two blades on the main rotor, and two blades on the tail rotor. This is an AH-1W Cobra. The Zulu Cobra, the newer ones, you'll see those over to the west. You'll note that that has 4 blades for both those rotors. That one also has sidewinders. We're not using those here. That one also has Hellfires, which we're also not using here. The reason we're using the tow missiles is because personally, I think they require more skill to use. I find them more interesting from a gameplay standpoint. With the tow missiles, you can only really have one of them in the air at once, unlike the Hellfires where you can fire multiples and do some really cool volley stuff. Also with the tows, you must have line of sight for the duration of flight. There is no remote designation as with Hellfires. First thing we go over is the crew roles. There's a pilot and a gunner in this. Pilot sits in the back, gunner sits in the front. Pilot is senior, gunner is junior. The pilot's responsibilities, first of all, obviously, he flies the aircraft. And at the start of the mission, this includes route planning. The pilot is aware of the broader view. He's the one that maintains the situational awareness at a higher level, such as where units are. He passes information down to the gunner as need be to keep him aware of what's going on. He communicates with the gunner to maintain a situational awareness because the gunner is usually in the gun sight and has limited awareness. This includes friendly forces, upcoming maneuvers, stuff of that nature. Anything relevant to the gunner to keep him from killing friendlies or to allow him to be, max effective. Pilot also stays in contact with command. Since the pilot's not engaged in gunnery, the pilot has time to do that. This being your 148, any local communications in the crew are just done in the intercom, which is direct speaking. Pilot also, due to being the one that's flying the aircraft, he determines what weapons are going to be used for engagements, and he tells the gunner this. This is necessary so the gunner knows what to expect. Tow missiles are fired very differently from the cannon. Basically, all weapon systems require the pilot to do a significant portion of the maneuvering. The turret does not turn 360 degrees. So the pilot's the best place to determine what to use. This is why he is in charge of that. Pilot's responsibility is to protect the airframe and get the gunner into position to fire. All this maneuvering is intended to fulfill one of those. If the aircraft gets hit, it was almost certainly the pilot's fault, not the gunner. Because of the fact he's in a broader view of awareness of what's happening, the pilot is in control of the gunner's fires. He sets them hot, he sets them cold. Over the course of any engagement, the gunner may not be aware that friendly forces have maneuvered, whereas the pilot should be. That's his job. For these FFARs, since those are aligned with the nose of the aircraft, the pilot actually fires those. So that's a one weapon system the pilot gets to employ. Very briefly, does anyone have any questions about the pilot? Alright, next up we have the gunner. As I said, he's a junior crew member. He's responsible for the cannon and the ATGM. The gunner has a sensor pod that's slaved to the cannon. He uses that to search for targets. He constantly searches for them. That sensor pod has very high magnification. It has 4 steps of magnification. Additionally, it has daylight TV, and thermal vision. When the pilot sees something, he directs the gunner towards it. The gunner uses that sensor to determine IFF, identify friend or foe. When the gunner is not, actively engaging, the gunner is free to do other tasks. He can assist with navigation. Gunner can determine firing positions, especially for tows. Gunner can mark the map for enemy positions. He often sees these better than the pilot does. Gunner is also clear to communicate with ground or command. This may include being on, the gunner could potentially be on the squad freak of whoever they're supporting, while the pilot is on the command freak. One very important thing to note is because the pilot's sitting behind the gunner, gunner sees better to the front of the aircraft. Gunner also has that sensor pod. Whenever landing, whether this is emergency or otherwise, the gunner will use that sensor pod and his better visibility to talk to the pilot and let him know if it's clear in front. That is extremely important in an auto-rotation setting, especially when we're out in terrain like Cell. Alright, we're going to go over some of the crew communication brevity. Before we do, does anyone have any questions about the crew roles and their assignments? Okay. As I said earlier, both the pilot and gunner tune the command net, and verbal communications are done through direct speaking. Let's go ahead and mount up our aircraft so we can talk over some of the things you'll see in there. Alright, first step of this, we're going to talk about crew awareness. Gunner has a turret indicator. If you go into your gun sight, pressing your optics key, which I believe by default is numpad delete. In your upper left, this turret indicator shows your offset relative to the helo's nose. Does everyone see that? Keep in mind that your gun and that sensor is stabilized. As the aircraft turns, it will not turn with it. However, the gun does not have a 360 traverse. Eventually it'll hit the traverse limits, at which point you'll see it start to rapidly pan. Pan your gun all the way to the left or right. Get an idea for how far it is. It's a pretty significant arc. And now here's the fun part. Pilot, press your iron sight key or your gun optic key. You will now see through the same sensor that the gunner is using. Possibly numpad delete, possibly iron sight. I forget, I have different keybinds. Thing to note is that you will not be able to magnify that zoom. You can, however, you can turn on the thermal from there if you press your in key. What you see as far as zoom and thermal mode on or off does not correlate with what the gunner sees. This mode is useful for getting a basic idea of where the gunner is looking. You can't IFF like he can, but you can confirm what he's seeing. This is very good to talk your gunner onto a target. You see something in a broader view, you go into his view, maybe he needs to go right, you tell him that. It's very simple. When you're in the gunner optic as a pilot, you'll see that your FFR circle will show up. This gives you an idea where your nose is pointed. You can use this to make some minor corrections, assuming the gunner is looking towards the front. One trick the gunner can use is he can ask for the pilot to check his scope to confirm alignment. Now we'll move on to communicating targets. There's 4 primary methods to do this. One is a compass bearing. You should see a compass, at the top of your screen with a digital readout as to where you're looking. Keep in mind the compass bearings change very quickly when you're in the air, especially when you're orbiting around a target, so give frequent updates if that's the method you're using. Another method is a clock bearing. 12 o'clock is straight ahead, basic aircraft kind of clock thing going on, and you can add high or low to that as needed, or a range. Next method is aligning to the nose. The pilot will often orient his aircraft such that the nose is pointing towards a threat, and then he'll tell the gunner, threat off the nose at such and such range. The last way to communicate targets is via the gunner's aim. You'll do a relative offset as I talked about earlier, where you see where the gunner's looking and you tell him how to, turn left, turn right, up, down, whatever, to adjust him on a target, and then let him know that he's on it, and then he confirms it. Next up, we have situational awareness. The gunner, being in his gun sight all the time, like I said, does not have the same awareness that the pilot does. The pilot can tell the gunner to come off scope. This is the basic brevity, get the gunner to come out of the gun sight view and look around. He may tell him to come off scope to talk about the broader picture, to orient the gunner better, etc. Due to the way that gun cannot pitch up very high, if you're in a steep bank to the left or right, as helos are prone to do, you won't be able to see anything but the ground rushing by very quickly. When this happens, it's a good idea for the gunner to come off scope and maintain situational awareness. If the pilot tells gunner to come off scope, he'll basically be telling him that one good example of this was we had a scenario where I had a new gunner. I was the pilot. We had a very large, visible, from my point of view, terrain feature. That terrain feature was a giant field that was differently colored than the others. If you're in any kind of zoom, you would not notice it. However, if you were out of zoom, you're looking around the cockpit normally, it's very obvious. So in that case, I told him to come off scope, find the light field on the east, on the right side of that. There's your target. Some little tips for the gunner. If you're flying around, the gun sight's tilted right, you're in a right-hand turn. If it's left, it's a left-hand turn. When you see a tilt develop and sustain for a period of time, expect to be hitting your traverse limit very soon. So start compensating for that in advance. At all times during flight, especially during any engagements, the pilot will describe what he's doing to the gunner. This allows the gunner to know what he's doing and not make a bad shot. If the pilot starts to brake right, you don't want to make a toe shot because you won't be able to follow it. There is no real formal method for this. Just be descriptive. Say something that your gunner will understand. For example, gunner coming off left, we're circling around, we're extending, we'll come in from the east for this next run. Prep your toe. Something like that. Go ahead and dismount for a second, over. Okay, we're going to talk about brevity phrases. To explain what I said earlier, the key thing in this is you need to say something that other crew members can understand. We're giving you a basis to work from. You don't have to follow these exactly, so long as your other crew member knows what's going on. As you're doing this, go ahead and coach, while you're in your aircraft, we're doing the little drills and stuff. Coach your fellow crew member as to whether what he's saying is good, bad, or you don't understand it. Come to some kind of understanding within each other for the best comms. All right, brevity phrases. The first one is steady. This can be said either by the gunner or the pilot. If it's said by the gunner, it's the gunner requesting a steady bearing to make a shot. If it's said by the pilot, it's the pilot is indicating that he's on a steady bearing, and the gunner can take advantage of that. Like I said earlier, we have weapon systems that they have constraints how they can fire. The tow missile has a very narrow window to the front that it can engage. The cannon can traverse right, left, but it can't shoot to behind the aircraft. If the gunner gets into a situation where he needs, he's hit his left traverse, he needs the aircraft to rotate left, it's very simple. He just says that, rotate left, and the pilot will start, turning. Then the gunner can say steady to let him know that he's reached that. He can now engage from there. The pilot can also indicate this to the gunner to let him know that he is rotating, left or right or whatever. When you're in low altitude flight, you're, sneaking around because there's some kind of anti-air threat somewhere. When you pop up to make an engagement, again, it's very simple. You say popping up, pop up, dropping down, drop down. That'll let the gunner know when his window of engagement is going to come up. An alternate way to phrase that is mask and unmask. If you mask, you're behind some kind of terrain feature. They can't engage you directly. If you unmask, you're not. You're able to make a shot. The gunner can indicate to the pilot what he's doing. Like if he's engaging something, he can say engaging. He can say firing. If it's a missile, he can say that he launched it or missile away. Whatever, just to let the pilot know what's going on. The pilot, since he's in control of these engagements, will give them clearance to fire. Simple commands, fire, engage, etc. If doing any kind of attack that requires the aircraft to fly towards a target, the pilot can say that he's running in. This will let the gunner know that they're about to go into a hotter area and start scanning front. Particularly when the gunner is firing, the pilot can tell, can inform the gunner that he'll be braking left or right. This way, like I said, there's traverse limits. If a pilot brakes unannounced, does a hard brake left, and the gunner's firing, it's possible that his gun will hit the traverse and he'll be firing while you're turning, which means his rounds will be going somewhere he was not intending them to. If there's friendlies in the area with close support, this is very, very bad. As I said previously, we have the come off scope stuff. We can also have the gunner tell the pilot to check scope. If the pilot's observing through the gunner's sight, he needs to adjust him. You can tell him come left, right, up, down, any variation of that. If the gunner sees something and he wants the pilot to confirm that he's on the right target, he can simply say confirm scope. And the pilot tells him, scope confirmed, or you're on target, or similar. So those are the basic brevity. It's up to you as a crew to find what works for you. It's not intended to be rigid. It's just to give you some kind of baseline and some expectations as to what's possible to say. Does anyone have any questions about brevity? Okay, stand by. Go ahead and get back to your aircraft. Okay, we're now moving into the equipment, weapons, and employment section of the lecture. The first thing we go over are the items that are available to both the pilot and the gunner, or should be available to both the pilot and the gunner. First of these items is the radar warning receiver. You may have seen this before, you may not. The radar warning receiver is a little GUI element that will show up in, I believe, the bottom right of your screen. A radar warning receiver will pick up things like the Tunguska and the Shoka, which use radar to guide their munitions. If one of these vehicles is in the area, you'll see it. The radar warning receiver will pop up. You'll hear a beep every so often that indicates the presence of a radar. It doesn't quite work like the real one. If you're used to DCS's RWR, it's not going to be quite like that. It will also be some indication of being engaged. Usually you'll hear like a sharp buzzing tone. Since this is radar, and the only countermeasures this aircraft has are flares, you can pop flares, but probably not going to do much. Best course of action if you hear that tone is to get down behind something, make a sharp turn. I'm going to demonstrate the RWR by placing out some kind of vehicle, and then I'll describe what the radar codes are and what they mean. You guys see it pop up?
Yeah.
Can someone state what it says on that icon?
So it's 23 on the green square icon.
Okay, these codes are actually real codes. There's a bunch of them. The ones that matter to us are 23 and S6, Sierra 6. 23 means there's a Shoka. So there's a Shoka nearby, its radar's on, and you can see it. Now I'm going to try and put down a Tunguska. Give me a second. Okay, do you see it now?
Yeah.
S6. Correct. So a Sierra 6 is a Tunguska, a 23 is a Shoka. You probably want to write that down. This is important to know because a Tunguska will fuck your world up because it has missiles, whereas a Shoka will just kind of fuck your world up because it has cannons. I couldn't tell you what the ranges are. They're probably between 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers right now. One thing to keep in mind, if you have a radar contact, or rather, if you do not have a radar contact, but you're taking some kind of cannon fire, assume that's a BMP or similar, vehicle, because they will engage air threats. Okay, do you guys see? You understand the radar warning receiver? Can I delete these objects now?
Yeah. I got a question regarding the radar warning thing.
Go ahead.
When you put the Tunguska down, there was a
Wait, hold
open
on.
bracket.
Beagle first.
There was an open bracket over like the top of the square. What does that mean?
Can you do it on the radio so we...
Yeah, if you're asking a question, ask it over radio so that everyone else can hear it.
Alright, when you placed the Tunguska, there was an open circle bracket over the top of the square. What does that mean?
In reality, it's supposed to mean something. I believe in reality it means that it's actually tracking you. I did some brief testing of that, and that's why I came to the conclusion it doesn't work like the real one. So I could tell you what that means, but I don't think it's always meaning that, if you take my meaning.
Yeah, right.
Yenko, did you have the other question?
Yes, on the RWR, the position of the circles obviously gives you a general indication of where, in terms of horizontal position, where the thing is. Does the RWR in ARMA give you range indication, or is it like a real one where it just gives you range indication in terms of difference between them?
Not entirely sure. Probably just do it through experimentation.
Okay.
Most of the time, when it comes down to it, most of the time when we're going to see these kind of threats, you'll be able to figure it out pretty easily just by looking at the map. Okay, so any further questions on the radar warning receiver? So that's the one piece of gear that's shared by both the crewmen. We'll now move on to the things that the gunner has. We touched on it earlier, you guys have messed around with it some. The sensor pod is the main piece of gunner equipment. There are 4 levels of zoom in it. The first 2 are indicated by a crosshair. The second 2 have a circular crosshair. I believe this is reversed from how it really is, but it doesn't matter. Gunner side has thermal and daylight television modes. If you're not too familiar with FLIR, there are cold vehicles and there's hot vehicles. There are also ARMA 2 content, or there is also ARMA 2 content and OA content. The FLIR feature came out in OA, so the A2 content doesn't quite look the same. Generally speaking, if there's an ARMA 2 vehicle moving around, it will be stark, pure white. You will not miss it. The OA ones are much better modeled. The appropriate sections of the vehicle will give off heat, such as the engines and the wheels. Those are typically trickier to find. I'm going to put out a vehicle here we can all look at, get an idea of how the FLIR works. Alright, gunners, you should see to your front a UAZ sitting there. Okay, right now, does that vehicle show as hot or cold?
It's cold.
You can see me in front of it, showing up hot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn this on and drive around. You should see it heat up. Let me know as you see that.
Yeah, I see heat in the engine.
And now the tires.
Okay, now that I've stopped, do you see it still kind of bright?
Yeah.
It's fun. One of those little fun FLIR aspects is that if a vehicle's just been sitting there and it's cold, it won't show up very easily. But once it runs, it doesn't just magically dissipate the heat. It'll sit there and cool off over time. So if we ever had a scenario where there were insurgents driving around in vehicles and other ambient vehicles sitting around, if you saw one that was sitting there that was hot, that means it's recently been used. So you can actually use that. It's kind of neat. Does anyone have any questions about anything we've covered so far?
Yes, Chris here. Just about the RWR again. Popped up late.
Go ahead.
Incoming missiles, will they be tracked? Assuming you have time to react, of course.
Missile launches happen from such close range in this. I was trying to see if that would happen. I couldn't determine it. You'll probably just hear the tone. When you hear the tone, you start doing something else. Evade.
Okay, got it.
Oh yeah, I had a question about the RWR. Is it oriented to the helicopter or to...
I would assume it's oriented to the helicopter. In fact, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't.
I got a quick thing about the flare.
Go ahead.
You know there's white hot, black hot. Is it just preference, or is there like preferential situations to use each in?
Just find the one that gives the most contrast for you. It's kind of a user preference thing. Sometimes it's just the way you see things. Sometimes it'll look better. You'll be more easily able to pick out targets on white hot. Sometimes it'll be black hot. Pilots, go ahead and take a look at your map. You should see Mars 1, 2, 3, 4 to our west. Confirm you see those.
I see that.
2C's.
Okay, we're going to get Solitaire back in here and get him in his aircraft. We're all going to take off. We're going to fly to those points and hover there facing north. Okay, now we're talking about the laser designator. To your front, past the forest, past the river, you should see some burned out BMPs with infantry targets surrounding them. Gunners, do you see those? Gunners, get your sights on one of those BMPs. Zoom in all the way.
Atticus, pop up a bit.
Popping up.
Alright, steady, steady.
You'll notice in your action menu you have an option for laser designation that says like laser designator on. You usually don't need to use that. If you sight on those targets, those BMPs, press your tab key, you'll see your number in the bottom left that was saying 250 will now change to the laser range of that target. Try that now. Okay, the shortcut, that's giving you a single pulse range. The benefit of this is that if we're in adversarial, especially at night, you know how we've all seen it before, a medium machine gun crew or some other laser designator, unit will be designating someone else will have night vision on. You see this gigantic fucking dot. If there's a human on the other side of that dot, they're going to recognize that as they're being ranged. This single pulse will not do that. This is also good if you want to range something like you're basically ranging the average distance and you're going to be flying around or whatever. This is a good way to not have to think about it too much. The other option, if you press L as your hotkey, will do that same thing that action menu entry does. That'll turn the laser on to constant lasing mode. You will see that little red dot if you zoom in all the way. Try that now and move around and see how it changes as you aim at different things. When you have it in the auto mode, you'll see there's a circle around your crosshair. That's an indication that it's automatically ranging. You have that dot and all the things that come with it. The ranging will start if you laze anything below 250 meters, it'll zero out an error. It can't laze that close. Okay, moving on to the next piece of gunner gear, which is the cannon. The characteristics of the cannon are as follows. As we went over earlier, the sensor pods slave to the cannon movement. You can pan very far left, right, and down. You can pan a little bit up. You usually don't need to be panning up because you're in the air and they're on the ground and you're trying to kill them, etc. The cannon fires 20mm rounds. It has a 750 round capacity. These are reasonably small cannon rounds. They have a fairly small casualty radius. It's about 2 meters. It requires a good burst on target to kill infantry. And it requires pretty close direct hits to really reliably knock them down. These rounds are called SAP-ET, which is Sierra Alpha Papa Hotel Echo India Tango. It stands for Semi-Armor Piercing High Explosive Incendiary Tracer. In our Arma 2 terms, it's a jack of all trades round, and it doesn't do anything, perfect. It's adequate for a bunch of different uses. Since we're in a Cobra that has automatic, laser ranging, we can fire these things out very far. Bear in mind the tracer burnout's about 1,600 meters, so don't depend on the tracers, depend upon actually seeing the rounds impacting. These cannons have short barrels, and because you're firing them from a helicopter, which is a kind of an unstable platform, there's a very wide shot dispersion to it. this becomes a very big factor at range. The further away you are from something, the more the bigger burst you're gonna have to fire to get some kind of saturation at the target end. Scans are most effective below 1 kilometer in range. Their maximum range is about 2.5 kilometers. Any further than that, you're either not going to see the target, or you're just going to be kind of spraying stuff at him and wasting ammo. Now, what Phil's saying is that his BMP target's about 1,200 meters away. Go ahead and sight in on these things. Laze them with tab. And fire about a 30-round burst, each of you. We'll do this in sequence. So Reaper 1, fire when ready.
Oops. Firing? Sorry.
Reaper 2.
Reaper 2 firing.
Reaper 3. And 4.
4 fire.
Okay, so you all should have a pretty fair idea of what kind of dispersion you're talking about at around the ideal range for firing these things. Some of you may have hit the vehicles pretty good, some of you may have seen infantry targets fall around it. The key point is it wasn't pinpoint accurate. If you look beyond those vehicles to the northeast, there's a road, you should see some T-72s sitting on it. Get eyes on those now. Someone lays that and give me a range.
1640 from 4.
Alright, we're gonna do some rapid
2
sequence.
kilometers.
Rapid sequence is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of you is going to fire a 40-round burst. Tell me when you fired. 1, when you're ready. 3, fire. Okay, now you should have seen that the dispersion opened up a bit out there. You had less density of hits on target. What you'll note, since we're firing from shallow angles from a distance like this, is the beaten zone, which is the area in which the round's impact becomes an oval shape, extending from you and in the direction that you're firing. So there were a lot of rounds impacting in front of those vehicles and a lot of rounds hitting the forest behind them. If you need a higher density of hits, you gain altitude, if tactically feasible. That will narrow, it'll shorten the beaten zone and put a higher density on whatever you're trying to hit. Some of you are at 2 kilometers. That's getting out there. A little bit further than that, and you'll kind of get the idea that you've dispersed your shots so much that you're more of a harassing element now than a really effective one. The fun thing is, since you're in a helicopter, you can just fucking move closer. Really simple. Threat permitting. The cannon's role, cannons used against infantry and light to medium vehicles. Light vehicles obviously will be destroyed very quickly. Any kind of wheeled vehicle, including BRDMs, you can mobility kill them very, very rapidly. Most light armor, BRDMs, some of the lower level BMPs, Vodniks and stuff like that, or up armored Humvees for that matter, will be killed quickly. The key thing to note is that it is typically not a catastrophic kill, which is to say they will not explode into flames when you're hitting them with a cannon. Note that a heavier, the heavier mid-range vehicles, such as a BMP-3, can soak these hits up from a long range. If you're not pouring a real high density of fire on them, it's not going to disable them. A BMP-3 will sit there and take it and return fire and down you. It will down you much faster than you will down it. If it gets desperate and you have to take out a vehicle like that, try and get high above them, try and shoot right down onto them and aim for the turret. You can disable it, or you can track them. But basically, if you're engaging something that's armored, you probably don't want to be using the cannon for it. An important thing to note about that laser ranging It compensates for range, but it also compensates for movement. So as you're flying, let's say you're flying north and shooting west, shooting left, you don't have to do much, if any, lead compensation for that. It should auto-calculate that. Another very, very important thing, if any of those pilots were watching through their gun sight as the gunner was firing, they will not see the correct tracers. The pilot is not in a position to adjust the gunner's fires. It's just how ACE works. What the gunner is hitting is unique to him, and that's what matters, but the pilot won't be able to observe that. You probably also noticed when you're firing that some of you hit trees, you'll see the round explode there. The natural thing to think is that the round is exploding there and stopping. Well, this is ARMA. It doesn't quite work that way. Any rounds you fire into trees will have a double effect. They'll explode, upon entering a forest. They'll also continue on past that and explode on the ground. So it's like a bonus feature. As you guys have been firing this, you've seen ricochets, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Because of the geometry of our fires, we're hovering low and firing more or less level with us. There's a very high incident of ricochets. This is the reason why when we're doing any kind of cast for ground, we have to be aware of our location, the target location, and friendly locations. It's unlikely that those ricochets will hit someone and kill them or hurt them, but it's possible. So whenever the situation permits, you do your runs in a fashion where your ricochet fan does not extend onto friendlies. If you need to be firing in some imperfect geometry, if, let's say, friendlies are being horribly murdered, as is apt to happen with us, and you absolutely need to be in there right now firing and your geometry is not perfect, do it. It's better to potentially hurt a few friendlies because you fired, in an imperfect situation than it is to set up for the perfect pass and in the meantime everyone on the ground dies. So just use good judgment with that and you'll be okay. Now when you're firing the cannon, we're always encouraging bursts. Fire 20, 30, 40 round bursts. Don't just sit there and hose it down. The idea behind this is that it prevents you from wasting too much ammo if your ranging was bad. It gives you an opportunity to, set a new range and fire. The other benefit is that it gives time for the smoke to clear between the bursts. So if you fire a burst, wait, let the smoke clear, you can do a battle damage assessment and determine whether you even need to fire again. Sometimes you won't. The further away your target is, the more beneficial it is to fire from a steeper angle, as I said previously. This tightens the beaten zone. This is also good if you're doing casts close to friendlies and you want to, maybe you're firing at an element that's between two friendly elements and you don't have a good way to fire from a more shallow angle. Getting up high is a safer way to do that. That basically wraps it up for the cannon. Does anyone have any questions about how the cannon works?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
What's a good, for say 2 kilometers, what's a good altitude to have a good dispersion or minimal dispersion?
2 kilometers, you need to get pretty far up there. Do a bit of practice offline and check it out. It'd probably be fairly high. That's the kind of tactic you could only use if you didn't expect there to be a significant AA threat, such as, the Shilkas, Tunguskas, or Strellas. Your other option in that situation is just get closer. Movement is almost always a factor of your tactics. You can almost always get closer to a target and change the engagement criteria because of that.
Dslyecxi, I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
ARMA and ACE, the laser designator, it does give slant range and not range over the ground, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
What was the question?
He was asking if the laser designator gave slant range instead of range over ground. Slant range is a direct range from you to the target, and that's how the laser works.
I got a quick question, Dslyecxi.
Go ahead.
Just curious about the type of damage this will do on buildings. Do you have any idea how much it'd take to drop a typical building?
It
With the cannon?
wildly varies. The way they did the building destruction, I mean, it can be a few rounds, it can be a lot. Most of the time you will find that if you put a good burst onto a building, you'll fuck it up.
Is there like a upper limit where if you spend this many rounds, you might as well quit, it's not gonna go down?
You know, use your judgment based on the situation. If you're in a situation where you're not expecting a lot of contact, and it's probably going to be sitting there using all of your ammo, you can probably be a little bit more spendy with it. But if you're in a situation where you're going to have just contacts until you get shot down, you probably don't want to spend more than, say, 50, 60, 70 rounds. Yeah, like Kilroy notes, some of these buildings, you can like sneeze on them and a gigantic hole will be blown in it. But there's no pattern I've noticed, so don't worry too much about it. Do you have any final questions before we move on to the tow missile usage? Okay, tow missiles. These are used against armor. They're an anti-tank guided missile. The tow is a tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided missile. Wire-guided means fucking nothing in ARMA. Optically tracked means you put the cursor on what you want to die, and the missile will follow towards it. Tube launched is kind of obvious. The range of these in reality is about 4 kilometers. Because of the way that ARMA 2 and Arrowhead render vehicles, you won't see any vehicles further than 3 kilometers, so that's our max range. Take on helicopters changes how that works. I would expect ARMA 3 to change that as well. These missiles are relatively slow. If you're firing out to your full range, it's going to take some time for them to get there. They have a narrow launch window. It's aligned with your helicopter's nose. I don't know the exact dimensions of it, but it's pretty small. So all gunners, line up on your gunner or on your pilot's nose right now. Switch to tow missiles. You'll note on the left side of the crosshair, it will say ATTK vertically. Does everyone see that?
Yes.
That indicator tells you that you're within constraints. If you fire a missile while you're in constraints, everything's cool. It'll track, you'll be able to guide and everything. If that doesn't show up and you fire a missile, it's just gonna go flying off from nowhere. You cannot recover it. Thus, you must be very careful. The pilot has to be careful about how he moves, how he's flying. The gunner has to be careful about when he's launching to make sure the missiles are all good. Now go ahead and pan left until you see the attack disappear, then pan back right until you see it reappear and disappear again. That's your launch cone. Okay, if you're familiar with how tows work in reality, they actually, a tow 2B will fly over and fire a penetrator down. That's not how this works. These are like the original tows. You steer them right into the vehicle, or target, or whatever you're shooting at. The tows can be fired while in motion. This is not like original WGL where you had to slow down to shoot them. There's a period of time when they launch where the missile is trying to find its way into the seeker window, or the crosshair window basically. That coincides to about 200 meters. You don't want to fire anything closer than that. And if you fire at around 200 meters, it's kind of tricky as to whether the missile will get there fast enough. Like it'll center up fast enough to hit. Since it's going to be fired while moving, it's usually beneficial to do so, even if the movement's very small, because when you fire it, there's going to be smoke in front of your gun sight. The closer a target is, the more likely it is that smoke's going to obscure your vision long enough to miss. So if you're sitting there making a stationary shot, it behooves you to make a little bit of lateral motion so the smoke will clear out of the gun sight's angle quicker. You can fire these against moving or stationary targets at whatever ranges. Keep in mind that right now in ARMA at further ranges, vehicles will warp back and forth at like every 5 seconds or so. That should be cleared up in version 1.60, which we'll be at shortly. But for now, just keep it in mind, the further away something is, the less likely you'll be able to effectively engage it if it's moving. If you're tracking a moving target, track it towards the front edge. I don't have much reason for this aside from saying that in practicing it, I found it easier to track to the front edge. If it slowed down, it was easier to adjust for. Let's go ahead and set up. You saw those T-72s from earlier? Gunners, go ahead and sight back in on those. We're going to do a very quick stationary shot against those T-72s, so you're all familiar with it, and then we'll practice on some moving targets. 3. Good hit 3, 4.
4 fire. Missile away.
Good hits.
I saw the effect of my hit, but I didn't see the effects of friendly hits. I did see one missile go, but not the other ones. Is that typical?
Same here.
That's pretty typical. That's just how Arma handles this kind of stuff. Fortunately, most of the time we will not be using 4 Cobras, so it shouldn't be an issue. Okay, what we're going to do now is you're going to continue staying in that position. We're going to do the same sequence. It'll be 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. I'm going to have individual vehicles come out from those T-72s down that road to the left. They'll appear there, and they'll drive down the road. 1 will engage the first one, 2 will engage the second, and so on. Before we do this, do we have any questions about how the tows work?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Do we ever want to use that laser designator for tows?
No, the tow missile has no awareness of lasers. Hellfires do, tows don't. Tows are completely optically guided.
Got it.
The only in a tow Cobra, the only weapon system that uses that laser is the cannon.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You were mentioning about the attack angle at which you could launch at. After that's the missile's been fired, can you exceed those limits by guiding it?
Yes, after the missile's been fired, once it's gotten at least 200 meters out, once you've seen it center up in your crosshairs, at that point, yes, you can kind of move it around. But keep in mind, if you do that and you slew really far to the right, it's going to have trouble compensating for that. You don't want to fire a missile forward and then try and hit someone that's to your right. It's not going to happen.
2 copy.
Question.
Go ahead.
Regarding pilot duty on keeping the tow centered, how much vertical consideration do I have to have? Like,
I think it's reasonably forgiving on that. I don't think the vertical elements will be too much of a problem.
alright.
I haven't had a good way to test that, so try it amongst yourselves at some point and see. Yeah, but I've never had an issue with it. 2, call it when you see it.
2 tally armor.
2, engage at will.
2 engaging.
Two, good kill. 3, ready?
3 ready.
Three, call it when you see it.
3 spotted.
3, engage after he has passed the prior burned out vehicles.
Alright.
3, you're clear fire.
Well, I got the turret at least.
Three, re-engage. Good kill. As you saw there, the first round hit the turret, knocked that out. It's possible that it killed the crew. You don't know for sure, so if you need to, hit it again. Now it's very clearly destroyed. Okay, that concludes the gunner equipment. We'll now move on to the pilot. The first piece of gear that the pilot has, the gunner does not, are the flares. If you press your R key, you'll dispense flares. Try that now. 1 set. Now press Control R. You should see in the upper left it will switch from semi to burst.
What if
Fire.
it doesn't?
It doesn't?
It doesn't switch, no, it just stays
Isn't it
in semi
shift?
and launch
You might
out.
need to check your keybinds. But once you switch to burst, fire one burst, you get an idea of how that works.
That was manually done, Chris. I was trying shift and all.
Just check your keybinds later.
Yeah, I'll do it.
The benefit of burst is it allows you to not really think about it for a pattern, a period of time. You fire one burst, it takes a few seconds to deploy. I think it's 5 sets of flares, and then you can fire another burst. Single is more, it's a little bit more thought involved. When stuff's going crazy, burst is probably a better idea. It lets you focus more time on other things. The intent of the flares, as you all presumably know, is to spoof infrared guided missiles. They won't do anything against, like say, the Tunguska. It's not going to care that you're firing flares. But if someone fires a Strela or a Stinger or something, it can spoof those. There are 2 types of ways to deploy flares. There's proactive and there's reactive. Proactive is you're flying into a high-risk area where you expect there's Strelas, Stingers, or something similar on the ground, and you just pop those every so often, as long as you're in that threat area, to deter them from firing at you. That's what you'll most likely use flares for. The other method is reactive. Reactive is very difficult with IR missiles because IR missiles, unlike radar missiles, do not give you any warning they've been fired. The only thing you'll ever see is if you look over and actually see the launch site as the missile's coming off. Then you can start popping flares. If you see any missile launch ever, you might as well put flares out. A lot of times you'll see pilots who are popping flares to avoid RPGs. That's fine. It's a good habit to get into. You don't have time to make that assessment. One indicator that it's an anti-air missile versus an RPG is if it's fired from further away, you see a steady smoke trail and it kind of curves towards you. But by that point, you should already have flares out. So flares are pretty simple. Does anyone have any questions about them?
Yeah, I got a question.
Go ahead.
So there's semi-burst and then there's auto. Is auto what I think it is?
Does it have an auto setting, really?
Yeah, these days do.
Yeah, auto just goes forever, as far as I know.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know what to do on that one. Experiment with it sometime.
If you hit
Let us
out,
know.
it just keeps dumping until you change them up.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Let me make a note of that. Alright, any other questions?
Cool.
Alright, next piece of pilot gear is the FFAR set. You should have, I believe, 38 rockets, is that correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
FFARs are intended for infantry and light to medium vehicles. You can potentially fire them at tanks. You may not be effective, and it's probably not the best idea, but that's for times, that's for measures. FFARs are best for mass troops, linear dispersions of troops, or anything where you can just pound the shit out of a collection of enemies in one area without endangering friendlies. FFARs are also excellent for seeking into an area where you can't get good eyes on. If someone's calling contact in woodline or something like that, you may not be able to get good effects with guns, especially if they're being stopped by the trees, whereas FFARs can get in there and mess things up. You have a lot of them. When you're firing them, you probably want to fire them in short bursts, maybe 3 to 7 rockets, depending on the target type. If you're attacking single infantry, you don't want to use a 10-round burst. If you're attacking a big collection, you can go more. Use good judgment on it. With rockets, you want to be attacking from a considerable distance. A common problem is people fly in and they'll wait for an absolutely perfect lineup and they'll get down to a low altitude and a close range, and then they'll be vulnerable to RPGs or other ground-based weapon systems. So try to fire them from far out, know how they drop, know that they disperse. When you're attacking with rockets, the pilot is doing that, the gunner is free to do, gun stuff. It's a good idea for the gun, or rather for the pilot, to tell the gunner to be engaging with the cannons as he comes in. From the gunner's perspective, he'll want to engage targets that are not directly aligned with the nose, because that's what the pilot's trying to line up on already. If he engages to the front left or front right slightly, you can do a lot more damage on a pass like that. We're going to do a demonstration run against some targets, some linear vehicle targets. Does anyone have any questions before we do?
One at ID.
Copy 1. Phil, do you see your targets? There should be 4 trucks on the road.
Yeah, I see them. Atticus line up 290.
Roger that. Orion 290, have them in sight.
Reapers 2, 3, and 4, just get in formation and hold there. Reaper 1, I want you to make an FFAR run on these trucks. I want you to brake before flying over them.
You confirm you want us to fire on them?
Correct, I want you to fire FFARs at the trucks on the road. I want you to brake left before you pass over them. If you want your gunner to fire as well, that's up to you. Reaper 3, when you're ready.
Ready. Kilroy, last 2.
Excellent 3. Four, when you're ready. Alright.
It is not an AH.
No. Okay, first off, do we have any questions about anything that's been covered so far?
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Will there ever be an instance where you use a tow against infantry?
Well, saying never would be stupid. It's improbable, but possible. You want to keep it in reserve. As long as you have cannon rounds, you'll want to use them on infantry. Now, one situation we might use a tow against infantry is if they're bunkered up in a building. A tow will take care of that pretty nicely. But okay, let's put it like this: if you have 2 tows left, and you're, you know there's still a mission to go, don't ever use those against infantry. Save those. Okay, we're going into the flight profile part of the lecture. First topic we're going to cover is speed. As we saw earlier, the Cobras can get very, very fast. The too long didn't read version is that you want to maintain at least 150 kilometers an hour most times. When you're in an attack run, you'll be at 200 or higher, just because of by virtue of the fact that you're in a dive and you're picking up speed. The same basic rules apply to Cobra flight as to any other helicopters, which is to say the higher you are, the slower you can generally go. Even if you're really high up, you usually want to avoid coming to a steady hover. Even a small amount of movement will help protect you. One of my dream situations in adversarial missions is one day I would love to find a Cobra or any other aircraft like this sitting away at standoff distance with me with a sniper rifle and snipe the pilot out. So don't let that happen to you. Any movement will prevent that. The one time where you might get a hover, as we talked about earlier, is if you're making a tow shot in a pop-up attack profile. You can pop up behind trees. But again, like we said, you want to be having some kind of lateral or slight movement so that smoke doesn't obscure the gunner's view. Whenever you need to slow down, you need to be super vigilant. The gunner needs to be scanning around, the pilot needs to be looking around. Slowing down is incredibly dangerous. When you're able to, stay high. If the threat environment doesn't allow that, stay low and offset your lower altitude with a higher speed. There will be some situations where you can stay low and slow, like we said. Maybe you're hiding behind buildings or something, and you know the situation around you. But anytime you're doing that, anytime you're low and slow, you need to make sure you're not in that position for long. If you sit in a position where you're hovering behind a building for, let's say, 5 minutes, that's one thing. If you sit there for 15 minutes, you've given someone time to move around, maneuver on you, and come up and just shoot you in the face with a rifle. Don't let that happen to you. Anything above the treetops to about 150 meters in altitude is also extremely dangerous. They'll have a reasonably clear line of sight on you most of the time, and that is well within their engagement range for their rifles, their machine guns, their RPGs, anything like that. When you're doing your attack runs like the FFAR run we did earlier, you want to pull out at least, no lower than 100 meters. If you can, pull out at 150 meters. This will do a big deal to prevent you from getting hit by those kind of weapon systems. I'm gonna go ahead and quote TDP2 here because there's some good sections about helo stuff. You guys probably should have read this already for this course as preparatory material, but we'll rehash it just so everyone's clear. One of the important aspects of helicopter survivability lies in using the terrain to maximum advantage. Hills, valleys, forests, buildings, those sorts of terrain features can be used to make a helicopter unobservable to enemies, and thus you cannot take fire from them. Attack helo crews, you usually stay low and fast like we said. You move from one covered position to another, and that allows you to avoid enemy anti-aircraft artillery, man pads, SAMs, etc. We need to engage your scout. You pop up briefly, scan the area. You don't want to do more than, let's say, 10 to 20 seconds of exposure time, and then you drop back down. So that if they see you, the amount of time it takes them to see you, identify you as a threat, pan over to you, figure out the range, and start engaging you, by that point you'll already be masking again. Now bear in mind that all this differs based on the terrain. If you're in like really heavily wooded, hilly terrain, you can fly higher because the terrain itself and the vegetation will mask a lot of fires without you doing anything. If you're in a big open flat desert area or a semi-open area like this with kind of rolling hills, you'll probably want to stay a lot lower. That's assuming they have a capable anti-air threat in the area. The basic thing to take away is that there's pros and cons of both. High altitude, it tends to reduce your vulnerability to small arms, crew serve weapons, HMG, AT, because people love to take AT shots at helicopters, and so do AI. It gives you better observation. You won't run into stuff in theory unless there's other aircraft there and they're not paying attention. You will typically have a much higher chance of being able to do a successful auto rotation because you'll have, you have more time. You're higher up, you have more time to look around and find a place to land. The higher you are, when we're talking about humans, the harder it is for them to recognize. Basically, they can't focus on the ground fight they're engaged in and the air threat at the same time. So if you get above where they're looking to engage, the ground force, you're basically invisible to them. You can do whatever you want. People just don't look up that often when they're fighting. Higher altitude also facilitates diving attacks and strafing runs. Some of the drawbacks of high altitude: you're more visible if they're looking for you. It's easier for them to hear where you're coming from. And because of your altitude, there's a lot more weapon systems to potentially fire at you at once. And of course, it's much easier for them to engage you with guided missiles. Low altitude, on the other hand, it reduces your visibility to the enemy. If they can't see you, they can't shoot you. You can mask with rain, trees, buildings. It seems, it could be wrong, but it seems like it makes it harder for them to locate where you're coming from just by audio observation. Lower altitude typically makes you less vulnerable to anti-air systems. Even if they do fire, you can just drop behind trees, and there's a good chance a missile will run into those and destroy itself. Now, as to the cons, low altitude has a lot more than high, I believe. You are much more vulnerable to anything on the ground. Any weapon system on the ground can potentially kill you. If they hit your crew, if they hit the pilot, you're done. It reduces your visibility. The less visibility you have, the less you understand the situation, the less you're able to make good judgment calls on what's happening. It introduces a very significant danger of running into stuff. Terrain, trees, power lines, anything like that. And again, you're less likely to survive an engine failure because of how low you are. If you have an engine failure while you're flying over one of these one of these big patches of trees on cell, you can't really do anything there. You're just kind of screwed. Lower altitude also reduces the effectiveness of some of your attack profiles. The diving attacks and strafing runs are not as effective for reasons of like the beaten zone we talked about earlier. Does anyone have any questions about the speed or altitude at this point?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Is there any kind of echo modeling at low altitude in armor?
No, not that I've ever noticed.
I mean, would that, or some kind of, because you mentioned that's harder to locate, would that be part of it?
No, I believe what happens is it'll just muffle the sound. And especially if there's a fight raging, you muffle your sound by so many decibels, it'll be that much harder for them to even notice you there. Whereas if you flew up in the air, you'd be a louder sound and they'd pick you up sooner.
Follow-up question to that is, I haven't seen it, but are there any kind of silencer, rotor type, I don't know what they're called, but you know those choppers you see in movies that are really silent. Is that possible in armor?
Well, that's kind of like a sound mod type thing. I don't think that really comes into play here. Helicopters in this don't sound like they do. Like, in reality, there's all kinds of dynamics about how the wind's moving, where they're coming from, all sorts of things. They sound very different. However, Arma 3, if they include that stealth Blackhawk stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if they put something like that in there. It may become relevant. It isn't now. Also, you guys in smoke grenades, good God.
Again?
Gotta smoke them.
Okay, range. As we saw earlier with our weapon systems and the lasing and all that stuff, we can hit things much further than they can hit you, with the exception of, you know, missiles. Use that to your advantage. Don't get in a rush. Don't force yourself to fly right up to something to engage it. You can stand off from them. We have now a 5-kilometer view distance. It's not, I mean, if we're ever playing a mission and this isn't enough for you, 5 kilometers isn't enough, or whatever, just ask. We'll boost it up. It's, you know, you can make a realism argument for that, I guess. But anyway, the point is, make use of your range. You can reach out and touch them from much further than they can you, especially if you're fighting infantry. They're just fucked, unless they have trellis. They're still pretty fucked then. Now, with that being said, urgency may not permit you to do that. Sometimes you have to get in there real close because stuff's just going crazy and you don't have time to extend that far. Situation dictates, you know, adapt to whatever's happening. When you're getting closer to him like that, that's where you as a gunner and you as a pilot having high proficiency with your weapon systems allows you to make the most of a short window of opportunity. If you get in really close to someone and you can rip off your rockets and guns and missiles real fast and get out of there, that's great. If you get in real close to them and you're slow about that, the longer in that engagement area, the more likely you're going to get hit. So that should be your motivating factor for learning how to employ these weapons as fast as possible. I'll cover the threats again so we're all very clear on this. The types of threats, you have heavy machine guns. These can be static mounted or they can be vehicle mounted. Heavy machine guns will fuck you up. If they hit your engine, they can knock it out very easily. Heavy machine guns, typically, you will see them indicated by a tracer, you know, a stream of tracers. Identify that, communicate that to your gunner, do an orbit over it, and you should be able to take it out relatively easily. When you're fighting something like that, anything tracer-based that's trying to track you from a long range, there's a lot of maneuvers you can do to set that, you know, to prevent that from hitting you. Change your speed, change your altitude, change your heading. Do it in short intervals, like maybe every 2-3 seconds you're changing some aspect of that. Then it's only luck that's going to allow them to hit you. Also, cannons fall in that category. Cannons are basically as dangerous, if not a little bit more so, as heavy machine guns. A few hits from those will knock out your systems. We also have medium machine guns. You often can't tell the difference between those and heavy machine guns. Treat them the same. You know, just hit them with your cannon. That's what it's there for. Any kind of anti-aircraft artillery, Shilkas, Tunguskas, stuff like that, most of those you'll see a radar warning receiver. It shouldn't be a surprise that they're in the area. So when you see it, you know, react appropriately. Missiles we went over earlier, you won't know if an IR missile's fired at you. You will know if a radar one is. So radar, get down behind something. IR, do the same thing, you know, brake, get down behind something, and pop flares at the same time. Last one's RPGs. RPGs in ACE, for whatever reason, airburst. They can airburst all day long behind you and around you and not do anything. When they get really close, that's when it starts to matter. If they get a direct hit, that will drop you out of the sky almost immediately. RPGs will not hit you if you stay fast. And you stay fast, you can stay at low or high altitude, but typically you want to stay higher, like we said earlier. Just don't slow down. If you slow down, you get hit. That happened to me recently in one of these cell missions, where at the end of it, we hadn't been engaged by RPGs for a long time. I got complacent. Complacency kills. We slowed down to facilitate a gunshot, and right then, RPG came out of nowhere, knocked me out. Aircraft went down. Crew was dead. They lost support right there. So learn from that kind of mistake. Don't make it yourself. It's really tempting, but you have to stay fast. Also, that kind of leads into just because something hasn't engaged you yet, it doesn't mean it's not there. Especially if you're against humans, they'll wait. They'll try to lull you into a false sense of security. They'll want you to get slower and lower, and then they'll mass fires on you or pull out some crazy, RPG shot. and then you'll become part of a highlight video. So don't let it happen. Does anyone have any questions about the flight profiles?
Yeah.
Phil, go ahead.
What's the airburst distance for RPGs?
They, in reality, it's like I think it's like 800, 900 meters, but that's not how they work in this. I don't know why, but they'll just explode when they pass within proximity of you.
They actually detect your proximity?
It sure looks like that, or else it's incredibly coincidental. Like if you watch any Fallujah SOAR type mission, watch the aircraft flying around. They'll have RPGs exploding right behind them all the time. It can't be coincidence. Right, you have the other question?
Yeah, it's not necessarily profile, but you mentioned the different types of threats. With Tunguskers, what kind of perception do they have of us radar-wise? Like, how quickly can they notice us?
It's a good question. It seems very fast. It's hard to assess that without doing some very deliberate testing of it. If you can see it, it'll probably catch on to you pretty quickly. You probably have time to pop up. Okay, let's put it like this. If it hasn't started shooting you, if you get down behind concealment, move to firing position for your tow, and pop up and take a shot at it, you'll probably get it before it gets you. But if it starts engaging you, you got to get out of the area, hide, and come back later and try and get it. Or try and do a running shot on it with a tow from altitude. Those are kind of difficult. Or, since they're light armor, you can do a rocket run on them. But again, it's firing that crazy-ass gun at you, and Tunguskers in particular have the missiles, so it's tricky. They're not easy to fight.
Yeah, I remember I was in the Tungus for a while back, and it had the same radar thing that you get in the helicopters now. I think the Shilkas do too.
Yeah, I don't even remember the last time I used a human-controlled one of those. Okay, next we are moving on to attack profiles. There's 4 basic types. They are break-off, slashing, standoff, and pop-up. The thing we did earlier with FFARs, that's a break-off attack. This is your general-purpose tactic. This is the safest one to use if you're not sure. A break-off is used when you expect there to be some kind of AA threat beyond or at the target location. And by AA threat, I don't just mean missiles and cannons. I mean heavy machine guns, medium machine guns, anything that could potentially drop you, which is, as we went over, basically everything. The break-off attack supports all weapon systems equally. It should be your default tactic. For it, the steps, very simple. You line up to the attack run, you go in there, you fire your weapons from a distance, and you break off so you don't overfly it. Everyone did that fine on the FFAR gunning earlier. And like we went over then, the sooner you break off, the better. It's really easy to get in that mentality where it's like, oh, well, if I go a little bit more forward, I'll get a perfect shot, whereas you had an okay shot already. Well, is that perfect shot worth getting hit for? Probably not. You have plenty of munitions. Your safety is more important than that. Next attack is the slashing attack. Oh, well, one last thing to tie in with what Yenko said. Breaking off ensures that anyone who's lining up for that, they're waiting to get closer and closer and closer before they open up on you. The break off prevents that from happening. Alright, moving on to the slashing attack. This is like the lazy man's break off, in that you don't break off. This is used when there's no AA threat at or beyond the target. This is an easy way to do cannon and FFAR runs. Like we said earlier, doing simultaneous cannon and FFAR works very well. This is just the simplest tactic. You line up for the target, you fly at the target, you shoot the target, and you fly over the target. Does anyone have any questions on that? Next one, standoff. A standoff attack is basically what we were doing earlier when everyone was hovering and firing at those targets at a distance. Standoff is okay if there's no AA threat expected. You usually use it with cannon and ATGM. FFARs almost always benefit from being used in break-off or slashing methods. For a standoff, you do a slow hover, or you stand off, out of enemy effective range. Get high if you want to. If you're over some kind of tangled ground like the forest over there, that can hinder the enemy's attempts to take you down. Alternatively, if you're over very open ground, such as if we were hovering over this airfield, it'd be easy to tell if anyone came up below us. Generally speaking, the higher up you are, the better it is. The pop-up attack, the last one, this is your high threat environment. tactic. This is where you're very low. You're using buildings or trees or something of that nature to mask yourself. You're expecting some kind of AA threat out there. You want to use this one with cannons and AT-GM. Typically, this is your AT-GM employment profile. For this, the gunner might be the one that's looking at the map and trying to find out where a good position is, while the pilot's busy staying behind, he's staying at low altitude and staying behind cover and such. So the gunner plots out a point, coordinates this, communicates this to the pilot. Pilot checks it, confirms it, they fly in, get to that firing position with stealth. That's the key part. If they see you go there, they're going to know where you're going to be popping up. If they're human, and if AI, they'll just use magic. So you get to the firing position with all possible stealth. You orient on the threat. You point your nose at it because of the constraints we have with the tow. You tell the gunner what you're doing, popping up. He confirms. You pop up. You have about, like I said, 10, 20 seconds or so to make this shot. Pop up, fire the missile. If the shot isn't good, or the gunner, for whatever reason, the gunner has, he has a say here. If the gunner thinks this isn't working out, he can tell the pilot to drop down. Whatever happens, whether the shot's fired or not, you wait to impact, or, you just drop down. And you announce that before you do. You announce it so that the gunner, if he's trying to make his shot at like the 19-second mark, and you don't think it's going to happen, and you feel there's a threat here, he won't waste a missile, in theory. Now, it's the same idea as if we're infantry. If we're infantry, we're staying behind a building, and we pop out on the right side, and we take fire at the right side. Do we want to pop out there again? No, we'll probably get shot. So, as a Cobra, we're even more flexible than that. We can maneuver all over the place. Avoid popping up in the same place twice. Even just moving a few hundred meters laterally will make a big difference. If it's a really high threat environment, move quite a bit. Distance away from the target, come around from another angle, and pop up again. So, Cobra attack profiles, pretty straightforward. There's only 4 of them. They're simple to understand. It's simple to figure out which one's used for what situation. We keep it simple. Our decision-making process is faster because of that. Does anyone have any questions about the attack profiles for Cobra? Alright, go ahead and mount your aircraft. We'll do a prac app of this. I've refueled, rearmed, and repaired one of the helos. Guess whose? Alright, pilots, check your map. You should have an IP to the northeast and a target to the northwest.
Affirmative.
From that IP, you see the dots leading southwest?
Yes.
The intent of this was we'll have the pilot fly in a southwesterly direction and curve in towards the target location. So the gunner will be scanning for the targets. He may see them, he may not. Once he orients on that road running through the wood line, he'll indicate to the pilot to turn towards it. The pilot will turn towards it, and the gunner will coordinate their engagement. We'll use FFARs and cannons for this. The target is a set of 4 trucks on the road with high trees on either side of them. 3, are you ready?
Yep.
3, go ahead, remember, slashing attack.
Roger, kill scan.
Alright, eyes on the road. Turn right now. Heading 282.
Roger, turning 282. 1282.
4 vehicles. Fuck it, bro. Let's engage all 4 with this gun.
I see. You couldn't engage all 4, let's waste an ammo.
Alright, tell me when you're ready. You ready? Yeah?
5. Destroyed so far.
Are those victory flares? That was a nice run. Alright guys, check your map. You should see an IP far up north, then an FP, that's a firing position, then a target area mark. Confirm you see those?
Reaper 3
One
sees.
sees. Do you have a suggested approach, or can we head straight there?
I'd like you to fly northeast, then north, break over to IP, and stage there. So everyone go there now. Now, I don't know if I explicitly went over this earlier, but it's a pretty intuitive thing. When you're in an area and you're searching for threats, if you find something that's not a threat, such as a soft vehicle, you do not prioritize that. You continue scanning until you see or you confirm there's nothing else out there that can hurt you while you're trying to kill it. Most of the time, well, let's not even say that. Just scan until you're confident of what you see in the area and then begin engaging, based upon how high of a threat they are. AA goes first, armor second, trucks and stuff can wait. And also bear in mind that once you've destroyed a piece of armor, the crew are not that significant. Go ahead and destroy more vehicles, then come back, sweep around, and kill the crews as you need to. Reaper 3, your engagement area is the original target area to your south. Confirm.
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 Reaper 3, from your current location, pop up, search your targets in that target area.
Ready to pop up?
Pop up.
Popping.
Remember, we're making that initial pop-up. Don't go too high. You want to come up real slowly and let the gunner scan.
Oh, yeah. Far field, looks like we got one BTR, one Shilka, or is that a Tunguska?
If you see a Shilka, engage immediately.
Alright. You ready for firing?
Fire.
Firing. Hit.
Mask.
Masking.
Now you'll need to shift over your left or right in this tree line, and then it's up to you whether you want to move up closer.
Roger. Kira, you're using the targets. Do you think we should move closer?
For right now, let's shift to the side and then take out that BTR, and then... Actually, no,
Right,
let's
I'm
not do
shifting
that.
left.
Let's shift up. Let's move up closer, actually.
Alright, I'm going around the right then. Let me know when you're as far up as you want.
Go up to this tree line, right, to the 160, right here. And then poke
You want this one here?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me stop. You ready to pop?
Pop.
Popping up. Is altitude good?
I got two Urals. Got a Vodnik with 30mm cannon and a BTR. I do not see anything heavy, but I got a radar blip to our quarter right.
23.
Yeah, I have no visual on it though.
Let's mask for a second. I'm gonna pop up again, see if you can see that Shilka.
Alright.
Popping.
Oh my.
Pilot,
Your
your
eyes?
alignment's way out. You need to talk him on. He's got his broadside facing the enemy right now.
You need to rotate to your left about 30 degrees. There you go.
170. I just got a Shilka warning to my right as well.
Yeah, same here. I don't have visual though.
Ignore that. You've engaged all the Shilkas there.
Oh, roger. And look for the 30mm Vodnik then.
Alright.
Second is the
Visual.
BTR.
Ready
Fire
to
on
engage?
the Vodnik. Yeah, fire.
Firing. Hit. Mask.
Masking.
Alright, and then
Is that altitude good?
go strafe to the left a little bit. So we're in a different position. And I'll take out that BTR.
Roger. We can be in this field, right? Be on this tree line?
I didn't say no.
I was asking you.
Well, this is good, because they're on the opposite tree line.
Alright, you ready to
Alright,
pop up?
pop. Steady and pop.
Popping up.
I need you to strafe left about 5-10 meters. Shooting away.
Strafing.
Alright, steady, steady.
Steady.
Firing. Hit mask.
Masking. many we got left?
I saw 2 Urals. I did not see anything heavier than those, though.
For the sake of
That was
training, you
the
have
detail.
1 more armor contact, and then you have soft targets.
Repeat fact.
You have 1 more armored target, and then you have soft targets.
Where haven't you
Roger.
scanned yet, hero?
Have not scanned the furthest to the right in front of us, so around...
Suggest you move front left, and then pop up.
Yeah, around 180 we haven't scanned, so move left.
Moving left. Let me know.
Here's good. Stabilize.
Stabilize, straight to pop.
Hold. And pop.
Popping.
Tank, firing. Hit mask.
Nice swing, masking.
Fact says you've knocked out all armor. Go ahead and mop up in there.
Roger.
Alright, let's go for a
Go back to the right, and then we'll take out those Urals.
Alright, do you want to do a strafe them?
I'm gonna do it with the autocannon.
Alright, what degree?
I believe they're 170, but hold on. I need you to pop up, and then we'll just
Are you ready?
do the break off one. Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Popping. Steady.
Spotted. 167. Opening fire. Mask.
Masking.
Looks like I blew the wheels off one, but I think they're still up. We should probably strafe them with FFARs.
Alright, is this degree going to be good at slash?
Yeah, slash them or just break off right when we fly over them. It's directly 12 o'clock, 167.
Alright, here we go.
Alright, everyone's dumped out. I'm just going to engage the autocannon on the infantry.
Yeah, I got eyes on.
Alright, break now.
Hang on. Breaking.
Good hits, Reaper 3. Get low. Go back to your IP.
Roger, masking, going back.
Alright, some of the things I observed during that, probably the biggest, most obvious one right off the bat, was when everyone popped up, almost unanimously, you guys were flying up really high. The point of popping up like that is that you kind of blend in with the trees. You're scanning around before you fully expose yourselves. You're progressively getting more and more of a view of what the engagement area is. Think of it like, you know, when you're clearing a room, you're slicing the pie. You see a little, you clear that, you see a little more, you clear that, and so on and so forth, until you see everything. With the way some of you were doing that, you were popping up in view of everything that was out there, and it would have, you know, shot you down. The other thing is communications, you know, crew brevity. That takes time to practice. This is just a practice thing. We're not expecting you to be, you know, 100% confident yet. It's really important for both the, you know, crew members to talk to each other, tell them exactly what's going on, keep them aware. There shouldn't be any dead space where someone's like, oh, does my gunner understand what my intent is? If you're not sure, don't let there be dead air hanging there while you're exposed. You know, ask him, prompt him. Both of you are doing a lot of stuff all the time, and sometimes you need to be reminded. For engagement with weapons, you know, of course, you want to say something before you fire a tow so the gunner, or rather, so the pilot knows to steady up. Because it's very easy for the pilot, without knowing that, to do a slight turn, fuck everything up, and then there goes your missile. One other thing I noticed is that the pilots most of the time, well, not most of the time, but there were a few pilots who sometimes when they popped up, they wouldn't align the aircraft with the engagement area. As you'll see, I mean, go stand in front of a Cobra sometime. It is an incredibly thin airframe when viewed from the front. It's very hard to hit. However, if you rotate it and put your broadside towards the enemy, they have much more surface area to shoot at. So you have to keep that in mind. Keep your nose pointing towards a threat and you're less likely to get hit. Now, having said all that, does anyone have any questions? Or comments or anything they noticed or had trouble with during that?
Yeah, I got one.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure, but I think you mentioned 20 seconds, but it seems like 5 seconds was like the maximum you want to be up there when you pop up. That'd be accurate?
Well, if you're starting, low and you're getting a little bit higher and higher, make an assessment. Just constantly assess. Do you feel really vulnerable? 20 is probably about the max you get to. If you're a switched-on crew, you know what you're doing. You have a good mark. You know what you're expecting because you're kind of hunting on those engagements. You're kind of hunting for where the target was. If you know right where it is, you pop up. You haven't seen it within the first few seconds. If it's a high-threat target, go ahead and pop back down and try again from somewhere else. Another thing worth noting is that in all those engagements, well, half of you had one engagement area, half of you had the other. The second engagement area, you had a limited room to maneuver in that. In reality, especially if you're fighting high-threat stuff, if you pop up, there's high threat in the area, it takes a shot at you and you don't get it, you're going to have to move more than 100 meters to come back up at him. So you just need to assess the surrounding terrain. If you have to go 500, 600, 700 meter detour to get a better shot, go ahead. It's better to do that than to try and pop up again and hope you're faster than he is. Now, does anyone else have questions? For the pilots here, how many of you feel confident in doing auto rotations in general?
Pretty confident.
Very confident.
Yeah.
Good. How many of you feel confident doing tail rotor loss recovery?
Extremely confident.
Yep.
Pretty good.
All right, the principles of all of this are the same as in any helicopter, really. If you have a tail rotor loss, you increase speed. You gain altitude, increase speed, and kind of bounce your way out of it, or rock your way out of it. Auto rotation, the key thing to remember in a Cobra, assuming your gunner is alive, because, when you get in a state where your engine dies, it's entirely possible your gunner died with it. If the gunner's there, you make sure, and he should be aware of this as well, he needs to be scanning down and calling out any obstructions as you auto rotate down. As far as the type of emergencies, we'll go over this very quickly. There's a fuel issue. Fuel issues come in two primary forms. One is you have a fuel leak. If you have a fuel leak, you'll be able to assess how long it's going to take. It'll be a gradual leak. You won't be surprised by it. If you have a fuel leak, you stay on station as long as you can. Determine what your bingo fuel is, which is when you have only enough fuel to get back to base. When you reach that point, go ahead and RTB. If there's a repair truck, a fuel truck, whatever, use it and get set up again. If you're bingo fuel, that's the other option. Just fly back to base and refuel and rearm if you can. So fuel emergencies are pretty boring, pretty easy to deal with. Next one's tail rotor loss. Tail rotor loss can happen in many different forms. You can have a lot of severe damage accompanying it, like you took a big burst of cannon fire across the entire airframe and lots of shit's going wrong, everything's red or yellow and orange. Or something you get plinked in the tail and you lose your tail without anything else being lost. When your tail's totally gone, it stops functioning, that's a severe problem. You really can't stay on station like that. The only time you would is if there's a horrible thing happening on the ground and you were able to do strafing attacks with your cannon and FFAR, then you might stay on for a little bit and do that. If you have a tail rotor loss, you guys know you keep high speed, that'll negate the influence of it. But almost always you'll want to get back to base and try and get that repaired. You won't be effective. You certainly can't do toe shots. Now, the next one, engine loss and auto-rotating. Engine loss is the same idea as a tail rotor. It can happen from a burst of cannon fire hitting you. Typically, you'll see your engine indicator go all the way red and you'll hear it start to spin down. You guys know how to go from there. You cut your throttle. Some people like to say that you have to maintain some kind of forward speed, blah, blah, blah. That's not actually true. Maybe that is how it works for real, but this is ARMA. You basically want to get your forward speed as low as possible, maintain full down thrust, and then when you're about 30, 40 meters off the ground, you do up thrust to flare. While you're doing this, like I said earlier, the gunner is communicating if there's any instructions to your front. So, the next emergency is ammo expended. This is more of an emergency for the enemy, but it's sometimes inconvenient for you. If your ammo is expended, let everyone on the ground know. You want to let them know before you're fully out, so their leaders down there can start planning on what their contingency is. If you're in a mission that has more ammo, return to that area, a FARP or a base or whatever, get rearmed, get back in the fight. That's really simple. Next one is wounded crew. This is fun. This has caused a lot of little dramatic moments for us. If you get wounded, expect as a normal thing that at some point you're going to pass out. You cannot stay in the air while wounded. Horrible, horrible things would happen if you do. If the gunner's wounded, it's not as big of a deal. Fly somewhere safe, set down, get him out, patch him up. You need to get him to a medic because he probably is going to need epi. Most of the stuff that's going to wound you in an aircraft like this is big. You know, cannons, heavy machine guns, things of that nature. It'll inflict a lot of pain, and you're going to need epi to come back to full health. If you don't get that, you'll pass out, and your gunner will just, you know, be useless up front. If it comes down to it, you can potentially land with a friendly infantry element. You know, get their medic to help you patch up. Of course, that depends on the threat environment. If the pilot gets wounded, but the gunner does not, go ahead.
No, this might be a stupid question, but does auto hover keep working if you pass out?
I believe so.
Cool.
Right. So if the gunner is not wounded and the pilot is, what you want to do is immediately fly to a safe area. It doesn't have to be back at base, but somewhere where you're pretty sure there aren't enemy. Set down and swap with the gunner. The important thing to note here is that any gunner of an aircraft like this needs to be competent as a pilot. It's really important that the pilots are able to be gunners and the gunners are able to be pilots. They work best as a team like that. The reason you do the swap is so that you're not flying back to base to get a medic and all of a sudden, oh, the pilot passed out and now you're going to die. In a real Cobra, either person can fly from either station. That's not how it works here. Hopefully Arma 3 will change that. Now, the last emergency is dead crew. If you lose your gunner, well, you know, that sucks, but you're still alive. Get the aircraft back to base, tell command, try and get a replacement. If you lose the pilot, it was nice knowing you. Does anyone have any questions about the basic emergencies?
I got one.
Go ahead.
Do we get parachutes so if the pilot dies we can jump out and survive?
I don't believe in parachutes, not in helicopters.
And
if you have one
question,
and you want to try it,
yeah.
go ahead. But like as SOP, I like to work from the premise that these are like real helicopters, so you don't parachute out of a helicopter like this.
So like it's not like a camo where you can eject the rotor blades and
Right, these ones are not
go
like
up.
that at all.
Right, and the other question is fuel leaks. Is there any indication besides the gauge?
You'll just see the gauge moving really fast.
Does it still blink yellow when it's fuel leak?
Did it ever? It usually only turns yellow when you get to a certain point, I think.
It used to like flash every time it go down if you had an actual fuel leak.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it does. I haven't seen a fuel leak in a long time. Alright, we don't need to do much crack app for this one. As long as you guys know and use your common sense when it happens. What I would like to do is I'd like to end on an auto rotation for the giggles. Let's go ahead and remount your aircraft. Nicely done. Reaper 3, ready?
Roger.
Reaper 3, start moving.
Reaper 3 moving. Reaper 3, lost engine going down. Mayday, mayday, mayday.
Oh, hey, you said it 3 times. Alright, right now what's below you is a lot of air.
That's excellent.
Oh, there's no hangar you can land in. Oh. Why'd my windows break?
Kiro, can your window open?
No.
Damn it.
Yeah, you have to open it on the ground. many more RPGs have we caught, do you think?
Like 50.
What the shit is that? Oh, that's my glass going by. Okay. Oh, there's a fence behind us, and then there's the runway that you're gonna try to land on, it looks like.
It's cool. Is there a helicopter in front of us?
Oh, no, we're good, man. You know, some grass, you know? Oh!
Nice.
Is this like bowls? Closest to Dslyecxi wins?
Send it down.
You're right on the runway. Nice.
Alright, nice job. Everyone dismount and rally on me. Does anyone have any questions about the auto rotation?
I got a comment.
Go ahead.
Well, in real life scenario, when we actually do fly helicopters, the reason why you want to keep forward airspeed is so that way you can bleed that off at the end and gain a little bit of slow it down, and you still have a little bit of control when you land it. As you guys may have noticed, when you're coming down close, you didn't have any more airspeed, but you're dropping down kind of quick. In that kind of situation, you could destroy the aircraft and kill yourselves in it. So, just suggestion.
See, the thing is that's just not how it works in Arma.
Yeah,
if you do it right, you'll be fine. You don't need forward airspeed. And if I were to comment on your initial one, you flew way out there, and then you got lucky when you ended up actually landing where you did. You were having to make a lot of turns to compensate for it, whereas the other pilots, more or less, were able to just set straight down in a safe area without having to do that. So I can appreciate there's a real tactic, but I don't see it as being as applicable here.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Earlier when I said if you could spiral down, I have noticed that if you keep banking, the rotor speed increases, but when you level out, it slows down. I don't know if you can use that to an advantage, so you can actually bring it in at a forward speed and then flare at the end.
Some people have said that the rotor speed matters. I've not noticed that it does, at least not in Ace.
Yeah, because who was the last person who came in? When he leveled off, even though the rotor speed did sound and look slow, it didn't seem to make any difference.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in Arma and in Ace, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, because in real life, it would disengage the rotor, and then it would reverse direction, and the forward airspeed would give you lift.
Any other questions about emergencies? Do you have any other questions about anything we've covered in this course today? Alright, then my closing comments are as follows. This is an introductory course. This familiarizes you with the weapon systems, the tactics, and such of the Cobra. This does not make you Cobra experts. That is something you'll need to practice. All these skills you've got atrophy. If you don't maintain them, you will lose them. So like I said earlier, use MCC, Fallujah, SOAR, whatever. If you need missions to be made that have Cobras in them, we have mission designers that can do that. We can very easily put together, like a modified version of SOAR to where you have a Cobra you can practice with. You guys know who all was in the course today. Who you flew with. Buddy up with them if you want. Get more training in, more practice time in. I know it ran a little bit long. Apologies for that. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks for attending. And we'll have an AR thread up this later.
Hell yeah.
Thanks for that.
Super awesome.
I hope that's a grenade.
Awesome.
Oh. Alright. See you guys.